Okay, look, not great. Not a great win. Still, it's great to win, right? Not the best version of the Kansas City Chiefs that you saw today. However, one thing that I think should be noted is that previous versions of the Kansas City Chiefs lose this game. This is exactly the type of game that got away from former iterations of the Kansas City Chiefs during a mid-season swoon that they basically always have. There was problems on one side of the ball, while the other side of the ball looked confoundingly good, but unproductive. Last year, versus the Raiders, it was the defense that looked confoundingly unproductive, and the offense that was completely inept. Previous versions of the Kansas City Chiefs 1000% lose that game. You see the numbers 20 and 14 on the screen there. That was the score of last year's Christmas Day debacle. Now, true, okay, I grant it. That was a month later in the season. It was one game. But we saw a lot of problems with last year's Kansas City Chiefs. Last year's Kansas City Chiefs won the fewest games of the Mahomes era. Here they find themselves 11-1. And we're going to end this video talking about something that would be absolutely hilarious. But moving on, the defense looked outright bad at times versus the Raiders, like classic Mahomes era bad. Aiden O'Connell looked like John Elway on that final drive. Regardless, the Raiders still scored 17 points. The Raiders only scored 17 points. The Raiders have scored more than 17 points in 8 of their 12 games. 2/3 of the time, the Raiders score more points than they did yesterday. Today, I work overnights. It's difficult for me to keep track of these things sometimes. So what are we looking at with the defense? The tight ends are a problem. Tight ends are a problem for this team. That said, Brock Bowers, left off an S there, Brock Bowers is a different type of cat. Brock Bowers is going to do that to a lot of teams. Brock Bowers is probably going to be one of the best tight ends in the NFL for a very long time. Still, 140 yards is a lot. This was an outright wretched performance from the safeties, but the perhaps more confounding part to that is, guys, what happened to the linebackers? What happened to Drue Tranquill? Coverage is essentially what Drue Tranquill was brought to the Kansas City Chiefs to do. Coverage is the reason that the Kansas City Chiefs, after last season, felt so comfortable letting Willie Gay walk in free agency. I have seen no reason to believe that Drue Tranquill is a coverage linebacker thus far this season. There has been, I don't know what, tell me your favorite Drue Tranquill moment from the season. Don't worry, I'll wait. I don't know that he is having the greatest season. Maybe it's because there is being more put on his plate. They seem to really like Drue Tranquill. I imagine there is a reason for that. Perhaps there is more going on in the building. There's more going on from the perspective of assignment soundness than I can diagnose. But I don't know. I just don't see it with Drue Tranquill. He seems to be having a down year to me. Speaking of down years, down games, Justin Reid had an off game overall. Obviously, there was the deep pass play where he just fell on his face. And I don't think he was catching that guy anyway. But just moving forward, Brian Cook had a bad game. Chamari Connor had a bad game. Brian Cook, by the way, is starting to show some of the worries that you had about him coming out of college. He looked slow. He looked to have bad foot speed and bad footwork. Those were sort of the prevailing worries about Brian Cook coming out of college. Jamari Connor is having a surprisingly bad had a surprisingly bad game, is showing a surprising lack of progress in my estimation this season. I thought that this season was going to be very good for Jamari Connor, especially considering how he ended last year. Now, not to blow things out of proportion, this could just be the myriad circumstance of losing one of your key players in a second cornerback. It adjusts everything to make everyone look just a little bit worse. Speaking of adjusting everything and making everyone else look a little bit better or worse, the impact from Charles Omenihu's return was immediate, but not complete. I do not believe that that was the best version of Charles Omenihu that we're going to see this year. He had just one tackle, but he was constantly getting off the line. No, he did not close all the time, and yeah, there was a few instances where Aidan O'Connell just had too much time on his hand back there. But Karlaftis returned to the sack stat line, and Chris Jones had 2. I don't think that there is any coincidence to that. Charles Omenihu is a force to be reckoned with. Teams know they have to allocate actual resources toward him, and so things get lighter across the board. There were times where I thought Charles Omenihu was just a moment away from making a real impact on the game. And we saw that during one of the Chris Jones sacks, Charles Omenihu ended up landing on Aidan O'Connell as well. So I think that the cascading effects of having a player like Charles Omenihu return will continue to grow as he stays on the field, presuming, of course, that everyone else stays on the field too. We've had no shortage of problems with that sort of thing during this season. That's true. But I think that I don't understand the cornerback number 2 stuff. I don't know what happened to Joshua Williams. I don't know if he has said something about someone's mother at some point in time. It appeared that he was on track to be going into the season. Everyone was questioning whether or not Jalen Watson was the actual number 2 corner. The amount of attention and emphasis put on Joshua Williams in the preseason was extreme. The coaching staff seemingly definitely wanted Joshua Williams to become the number 2 cornerback while Jalen Watson was still injured. Didn't happen, and now he's apparently 12th on the depth chart. Guys, I might get put in the game before Joshua Williams. We saw a little bit of him in this game, but I don't understand what's going on there. It's a strange twist and turn of the Joshua Williams experience here in Kansas City. And the last thing I have to say about the defense, that final play that the Raiders had the ball is snapped, bounces off Aidan O'Connell's shoulder pads, and the Kansas City Chiefs recover it. We've seen no shortage of moments like that for the Chiefs, right? Pretty active defense over the past few seasons, a defense that was ascending in the rankings over the past few seasons. How, I ask you, how is it always Nick Bolton who ends up with the football in his hands? How is it always Nick Bolton? That is a question that is, go back and look. It is always Nick Bolton who emerges from the pile with the football in his hand. Now, moving on to the offense. The offense did look better, but just as we say that the defense looked bad, but they only gave up 17 points, the offense looked good at times, but they only scored 19 points. Mahomes went over 300 yards for the first time this season. And it was sort of a throwback to classic Mahomes. You didn't know where the ball was going to go. You didn't know who was going to be on the receiving end of things, and you didn't know where that ball placement would be. But the ball was out, Mahomes was active, and though it was not maybe 20... So if you go back, 2018 Patrick Mahomes was sort of more by the book. It seems strange to say, but he was by the book until he wasn't. It was 1, 2, 3 steps and fire, or it was 1, 2, 3 steps, nothing's going on, run around for your life and throw it up without possibly looking. Now he's a little bit in between both of those takes. The offense is more 4 and 5 step drop, and he is creating maybe before he has to. He's still not running a whole lot, so we will definitely see a return to Patrick Mahomes running in the playoffs. But this offense is, I won't say floundering, but scoring 19 points when you look that good in the passing game is confusing. Now, part of that is that with the return of Isaiah Pacheco, Andy Reid turned back into classic Andy Reid, refusing to run the football. Isaiah Pacheco, okay, so he had an average that was better than his day because he ripped off a 30-yarder. The Chiefs had 63 rushing yards total, including Patrick Mahomes, though Patrick Mahomes only went for 4. Pacheco with the one breakout run kind of makes that entire stat line look better, because otherwise it would have been 33 rushing yards. I don't remember if it was exactly a 30-yard run, but it was a 30 to 30-plus yard run. So it's possible that without that run, maybe if it was a 34-yard run, all of a sudden your entire rushing day is 29 yards without that run. I don't know where that comes from. Just a confusing day from the... kind of a confusing day overall. I just have to say it. But again, going back to that first point, the confusing days are the games the Kansas City Chiefs normally lose. If the Kansas City Chiefs go out there and you understand everything that happens, oh, okay, well, you're passing to the tight end, you're throwing to your speedy wide receiver, you're throwing it up for the guy who has the incredible catch radius on defense, you're making a few sacks. If you understand everything that happens, the Chiefs win. If you understand, if a Sunday happens and you think, yeah, pretty good, that's a Chiefs win. When Sundays happen that you end up thinking, I really don't know what happened there, go back, those are the losses. The Bills game, kind of one of those games. But that's this year. This year, the whole season has been kind of like that. Last year, those games, like the Christmas Day meltdown, you thought, I don't know what team it is we just watched. I don't know who that team is. And the Chiefs lose those games. The Chiefs gave up 5 sacks for the second week in a row, and part of that is that it looked to me like they threw the sink at Wanya Morris. Maybe not with blitzes entirely, though I think there were a few blitzes that were targeting Wanya Morris. But go back and look at the moves that those defensive ends employed versus Wanya Morris. A lot of start stops. Here's the thing with Wanya Morris. If he gets a hand on you, he's pretty good. When he loses from the get-go. When Wanya Morris loses a rep, it's normally right off the ball. This is one of the things that makes me think he might be in for a move to offensive guard, because you're not going to have that free get-off versus a lot of defensive tackles or those interior defensive linemen, nose tackles, etc. But Wanya Morris, when he gets his hand on a defender, it's pretty good at least standing them up. So, kind of a confusing thing. Here's the thing with that. DJ Humphries is now a Kansas City Chief. If DJ Humphries is who he was, right? If DJ Humphries is basically who he had been for the entirety of his career, Patrick Mahomes throws for 400 yards in that game. If DJ Humphries is who he was, that's all, just is who he was, Patrick Mahomes has an absolutely phenomenal game because he doesn't have to rush the throws that he rushed. He does not have to zing the throws that he zang, and he does not have to chuck it up on the times where he simply chucked it up. So we will see with DJ Humphries. Still, I think that this team is definitely poised to make a playoff run. I don't see any reason to believe that is not the case for a team that is 11-1. We did, however, at the end of this game, end up seeing left Tooney, Joe Tooney at left tackle, LTL Tooney, and Mike Caliendo in at guard. It strikes me that if this team still had Nick Allegretti, which I'm not saying they should, it's difficult to spend that type of money on a backup interior offensive lineman. If they still had Nick Allegretti, I think this move to Joe Tooney at left tackle and Nick Allegretti at left guard would have happened a lot sooner. I do not think that we will start next week's game that way, regardless of if DJ Humphries is ready to go versus the Chargers. If he is ready to go, DJ Humphries is ready to go, I don't know that we see him for the whole game. I think they might trot him out there, get him the reps, get him warmed up, figure out where he is with live fire. Again, the Chiefs taking a practice situation onto an actual NFL game. But I think that might be the case versus the Chargers. If he is not ready, I think we still see him for a little bit against the Chargers just to get that practice work on his legs. I do not think, even if DJ Humphries is not ready to go, we will start next week with left tackle Joe Tooney. I think it will be Wanye Morris or Kingsley Suamataia. I think that you just have, maybe. Now that I'm saying it, I'm kind of talking myself out of it. It's about upside versus downside. The upside to Wanye Morris or Kingsley Suamataia taking that next step, which is always possible, maybe unlikely. I'm growing to think it's more unlikely than likely. The upside to that happening is a lot more offensive success. The downside to Kingsley or Wanye staying at left tackle is absolute 5-sack disaster. The upside to Joe Tooney playing left tackle is that you have competent left tackle play. Not great, but competent. Joe Tooney is a bit limited. Athletically, he's a bit limited for reach. He's going to be much better at taking on oncoming blitzers. He's not going to be as good for the running game. The downside is that all of a sudden you have Mike Caliendo, a UDFA offensive guard, and you have a left tackle who's still not going to be great versus speed rushers, right? So that is what it is. Take of my opinion what you will. I don't know exactly where to go with it. DeAndre Hopkins went off 4 for 90 catches, or 4 catches for 90 yards. He had dropped a couple passes that I think he normally catches. Difficult catches to make, though they would have been normally. DeAndre Hopkins is a guy who comes down with them, made a couple phenomenal catches that no one else very few people in the NFL do make. Here's the interesting part to the game that was had by DeAndre Hopkins. We saw him draw a couple penalties. Patrick Mahomes found himself willing to just sling the ball in DeAndre Hopkins' direction. That's a good thing. That's going to make the offense more unpredictable. That is going to, or less predictable, I guess, perhaps you should say. It's going to make the offense more dynamic. It's going to get a lot of opposing fan bases' panties in a bunch because they're going to claim that that's not pass interference. It will be. If you are that cornerback, you go ahead and interfere, because the other option is DeAndre Hopkins catches the ball, you fall down, and all of a sudden it's a 60-yard touchdown for the Kansas City Chiefs, and you were just the latest victim. So you go ahead and slap at his hands, kick at his ankles, and make sure he doesn't make the catch. And you make the referees call it, because DeAndre Hopkins makes that catch. Now, It's also going to open things up for other players, because if Patrick Mahomes is all of a sudden taking more chances, saying, screw it, it's 2nd and 3, we'll get it next time if we don't get it here, I'm going deep to Nuke Hopkins. If he does that more often, this offense opens up. Not the least of which way in which this offense opens up. Xavier Worthy, in his last 3 games versus the Bills, he had 61 yards. Versus the Panthers, he had 46 yards. And versus the Raiders today, he had 54 yards. That's 161 yards in 3 weeks. That's 161 yards in 3 weeks. In the previous 9 games, he had 246 yards. Xavier Worthy is starting to take off. Xavier Worthy is starting to become an actual legitimate threat for this Chiefs offense. We saw Xavier Worthy today make a diving grab that had to be overturned. Xavier Worthy has good hands. We have seen him a couple times this year drop something that should be caught. We have seen him a couple times this year catch the football out of bounds. I have remained steadfast in saying that's going to get ironed out. We're starting to get a little bit late in the afternoon for it to get ironed out as we are 12 games into the season, but it's starting to get ironed out. He is starting to play with confidence as opposed to trying to dot his I's and cross his T's. Xavier Worthy is going to be a force to be reckoned with in the playoffs, as long as that Texas athlete is able to play in the cold. One criticism I do have about Xavier Worthy is this. For some reason, Xavier Worthy has 2 moves. He catches the football, sees a defender, and runs out of bounds, which is probably the preferable outcome to move 2. Move 2 is he puts his shoulder directly into the defender. He does not juke. He does not cut. He does not try to wiggle. He does not turn it upfield. He either steps out of bounds or puts his shoulder directly into the defender. That's going to be a problem at some point for Xavier Worthy. Here's the final thing that I have to talk about with this game. Hear me out. The Kansas City Chiefs play the Chargers next, who they've already beaten, and I thought that game was deceptively close as a 7-point win. I thought the Chiefs actually were in more control of that game than that for which they're given credit. Then the Kansas City Chiefs play the Browns, who are giant killers. 2 of their 3 wins this season are versus the Ravens and the Steelers. That's still a game the Kansas City Chiefs should absolutely win. Then is the Texans. Texans, very scary team. But they are going through a second half slump. They are 7-5 at the moment, and they looked at one time to be on pace to be one of the better teams in the entire NFL. Then you have the Steelers. Very big matchup. Very scary team. But Andy always seems to do well when pitted against Mike Tomlin for whatever reason. Is this a game they should win? Yes. Is this a game they can win? Yes. Is this a game that is definitely going to be a win for the Kansas City Chiefs? No, but they can. This team is capable of getting up for the playoffs. It's basically a playoff game. This team is capable of doing a lot of hard work, and they have 2 real tests left on the schedule. They play to the level of their opponent. It's a winnable game. And finally, the Kansas City Chiefs play the Broncos, who this team has already beaten. I know, but don't say it. It was a win. The 1 seed is definitely still in the picture. That is for sure. And I'm going to ask the question. Is winning out in the picture? If I were to ask you, is it possible? What would you say? You would say yes. If you look at those games and you were honest with yourself and me, you would say it's possible, for sure. So that leads me directly to this question. Could we be doing the most complaining we've done in a long time, only to win the most games of the Mahomes era and tie the regular season record for wins? Remember that undefeated Patriots season that we saw was during a 16-game schedule. The Chiefs, should they win the rest of their games, which is possible, would be 16-1. We've done a lot of hooting and hollering about cornerback 2. We've done a lot of hooting and hollering about left tackle. We did a lot of hooting and hollering about wide receiver. We did a lot of hooting and hollering about running back when Isaiah Pacheco first went down. We did a lot of hooting and hollering about the defensive line. Early in the season, and I think rightfully so, there was a lot of hooting and hollering about the linebackers. The Kansas City Chiefs are primed to go 16-1. Should they go 16-1, how horrible does that Bills loss feel? That would be monument. So here's the real question, right? Do the Bills have one more loss on their schedule? Because if the Bills have one more loss on their schedule, the Kansas City Chiefs don't really play the Denver Broncos in Week 18. The Kansas City Chiefs do the same thing they do basically every season, and they go ahead and rest that final week of the year. Everybody knows this team needs it this year. Every year there's always the question, well, do they rest? Do they rest? Kind of this year, I think you absolutely do with all of the injury troubles that you've had. But guys, all the complaining we've done, the Kansas City Chiefs are in position to win the most games they have of the Mahomes era. That's all I have for this video. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other Kansas City Chiefs fans. If you find yourself here by chance but not design, the Chiefs are the only thing I talk about, dropping multiple videos every single week. I've dropped the video for about 650 days now, I think. So consider hitting the subscribe button, stick around, and as always, I hope to have you back for the next one.